Hello, I'm Matthew Weinstock with Hospitals and Health Networks. You don't normally, if ever, associate the credential of nurse practitioner with the title of president of the medical staff, except maybe at Ellenville Regional Medical Center in upstate New York. Bob Donaldson has been head of the medical staff at the Critical Access Hospital since 2009. In that time, the hospital has embarked on a series of performance improvement initiatives that have landed it numerous state and national awards. Ellenville CEO Steve Kelly believes that the role of nurse practitioners and others will continue to grow as healthcare evolves. I'm joined now by Steve and Bob to talk about this evolving trend and nurse practitioners taking on a larger role in the care of patients. So Bob and Steve, thanks for joining me today. Bob, let's go back to 2009 or so when the president of the medical staff came open, and what led you to think about putting your hat into the ring of into that position as a nurse practitioner?
Well, I've been involved in leadership in various organizations for years. I noticed that our vice president of medical affairs had put out a notice in September, in October, and again in November, looking for candidates for this position that was becoming open. And after the third letter, I walked into her office and I said, "What does this mean?" And she said that she wasn't getting any response. But she did have one candidate. And it was a reluctant candidate. And I said, "Well, this is no good." I said, "Quite honestly, I wonder what Mr. Kelly would say now that the bylaws are changed about a nurse practitioner running for presidency," because the medical staff had voted equal privileges for nurse practitioners who admitted to the hospital, meaning that they could vote an equal vote and they could, in fact, hold office. So I threw my hat in the ring.
And Steve, what was your reaction when you had heard that Bob was going to run for this position?
Well, I thought it was a little early since we had just gotten the bylaws changed. But really, I thought it was a good idea also. I wasn't sure he would win, but I felt that it was the right thing to have anyone who wants to stand up in leadership. And I think many medical staffs have good people who don't run because they're kind of told not to. Medical staffs, the idea of being part of administration or leadership is somehow seen negatively, and so they don't participate as much as they might otherwise.
What's it meant to the medical staff? I mean, how has the integration of your leadership position influenced the staff?
Well, that's harder for me to answer than it may be for them. I've enjoyed it. I hear that meetings run very smoothly, tend to stick to organization pretty well. People do listen to me. I've gone to several of our providers, and sorry, I use the term providers, meaning physicians or nurse practitioners. If we have problems with people's practice, as you know, that's part of the medical staff function, is to look at quality issues. If we have any discussions over that, I'm not afraid to talk to people. People tend to be open to me, and we get them resolved.
I would also say that Bob has really gained in stature on the board. When we first talked about having a nurse practitioner practicing independently in our emergency department, I had a board insurrection. I had board members who thought that that was close to the end of the world. It was a disaster. People wouldn't come. It would be a real huge problem. And now, these years later, we don't see that as an issue at all. In fact, now they're fully integrated into the board.
So as you think about what's played out at your hospital, and we were to expand that nationally, obviously we're seeing shortages in some areas of providers. What role do you think nurse practitioners and other parts of the community that aren't physicians are going to play in delivering care to presumably more and more people coming to the hospital as they get more coverage?
I think that we're going to see a lot of changes. I think we're going to see a rise in the stature of primary care, which has not had high stature. We've been a very specialist-driven healthcare environment. So we see an enormous inequity between primary care providers of all flavors and specialty or subspecialty care. Primary care is a specialty. And that is going to change some. We're going to see very large increases in salaries and income for primary care providers. And I just think that's what's going to happen. And so suddenly primary care will become relatively lucrative, and it'll be a lot more in the center of things. And so more people will do it. They won't feel that they have to subspecialize to pay off their student loans, which are pretty heavy. So I think that that will be a major shift. And I don't know that the Affordable Care Act is going to drive that. I think that's happening because we're seeing a major focus on costs and a major focus on re-engineering healthcare. Again, that's much easier said than done because we have protocols that are all designed around subspecialties.
Nurse practitioners are a valuable portion of our workforce. I think there is just a deep pool of available leaders for our organizations, for our communities. Part of the Affordable Care Act says that nurse practitioners, in fact, can be leaders of those teams. And I think that we need to be aware of that and open to it if we're going to get out of this focus of tradition that only one team of medical providers can lead the group.
I also want to get to some of the things you guys have done at the hospital. I know you've instituted some performance improvement initiatives, starting with the ED, improving throughput, I believe, right? You've dramatically reduced patient wait times. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done there and particularly why you targeted those areas for the ED to start with?
We were looking at our ER, and to me, it seemed like in order for us to be competitive, we needed to be a lot quicker. And we were running at about 3.5 hours, which is better than the 4-hour and 7-minute national average. I still wasn't that impressed. It seemed to me that we need to be, closer to 90 or 100 minutes because that's kind of the drive time to and from any of our nearest competitors. We started measuring things. We measured things like lab turnaround, and it was like 1 hour and 15 minutes, which I'm told is pretty much standard. I mean, everybody thinks that's a good time. Last month, that was 22 minutes. That is a huge savings, and many of our patients require labs. We did the same thing for radiology. We also started measuring intervals from when a patient arrived to triage, to the nursing assessment, to the provider assessment, and then looked at how those intervals impacted overall length of stay. We had quite a bit of diversity in how long it took for providers to get to, which were all physicians at the time, to the patient. I couldn't understand why there was such a diversity. We had some that could get there in 15 or 18 minutes, and we had others that took over an hour. So there was one in particular, I went to see him, and I showed him the data, because I believe that the only way we can do anything is to share the data. Here's what the data says, and can you please explain to me why it is that it takes you over an hour to see patients, and everyone else is quite a bit less? And that provider explained it to me. They said, well, you see, Mr. Kelly, patients really appreciate you more if they have to wait a little bit longer.
Honestly, that's what he said.
He really believed it. He really felt that if you came too quickly, then people would take you for granted and they wouldn't appreciate you that much. So I had him taken off the schedule. He never worked there again, because that isn't the way I looked at it. I looked at it, the longer that patients are there, the higher the anxiety level, the worse their outcomes, their patient satisfaction is less. In every way, it is less. To me, we need to be crisp. We need to be quick. And that's quality from a patient's perspective. And since we started that initiative, we went from 7,600 visits to about 13,000. and we've stayed at 13,000. I mean, that's amazing, dramatic change in market share and in confidence from our community. When people think that your ER is good, they kind of think everything else is good.
And Bob, culturally then, what does that new mindset do to the staff, to the medical staff, to say, we've got to look at all these areas and figure out where we can improve?
Well, once people know that they and others are all being looked at for best performance, then it heightens everybody's awareness. And we turn it around that not only are we looking at performance issues, what's the end result? The end result has always been quality care from a patient perspective. I have always said there's only one room in a whole emergency department that's properly named, and that's the waiting room, the dreaded waiting room. And we wanted to get people out of the waiting room. Have the lab people buy into it, have the radiology people buy into it, and place a manager that bought into it right on through each department. And we get together and we discuss issues. Why is the ER waiting so long for this? Why is in radiology, why did we have to wait so long for this? We've brought people on that believe in the concept.
And so what might be the next steps for you guys then in terms of continuing this performance improvement throughout so it reaches throughout the hospital?
Well, we have done other performance improvement. We reduced medication errors by 90%. 2013 over 2012, we lowered it another 49%. I mean, it's just, we've been really focused on that. No hospital likes to admit that they have medication errors. I believe in chasing zero. I don't think we should have any. I'm told by nursing staff and all kinds of professionals that if you don't have some errors reported, they're not reporting them, and so therefore you're misstating things. I come from a background where I think that one is too many. If it was my mother or my child, one is too many. And that's the way I think most people outside of our business look at it. We're putting a lot of effort also into looking at how efficient we can get. And one of the problems that hospitals have is that we have a high operating cost. I mean, we're mostly a fixed budget. And I think that over the next few years, we're going to see weaker hospitals, ones that have too much debt or have other problems, aren't going to be able to sustain themselves. And the market will reach a new equilibrium at a lower level because the changes in practice, shorter lengths of stay, more outpatient procedures, and so forth, the fundamentals are driving down the need for as many hospital beds. And what I predict is that we'll see smaller hospitals and we'll see major hospitals, and we won't see the hospitals in the middle the way that we've seen them.
So I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Very much. We appreciate it.
And I'm Matthew Weinstock with H&HN. Thanks for tuning in.